If the city of Baltimore was a patient at a hospital, the prognosis would not be good. Once a proud city with nearly 1 million people, the population may soon fall below 600,000. The sounds of sirens fill the air as police run from murder to murder. Hundreds of people are dying on Baltimore's mean streets. The scars of neglect are evident for all to see. Crumbling roads, decaying buildings, broken homes, trash piles up in alleys and streets. The sense of hopelessness fills the air. Baltimore is a city in crisis. What can be done to save our city? Who can save our city? From Fox 45 News, this is Your Voice, Your Future Town Hall. Please welcome your moderators, Kai Jackson and Mary Bubala.
And good evening, everybody. I'm Mary Bubala. I'm here along with my colleague, Kai Jackson, and we want to welcome you to our Fox 45 Town Hall, Your Voice, Your Future. Kai, it is our 11th Town Hall. We're taking them
hard to believe,
really to neighborhoods across our city. We have a few more to go. Tonight, we are in Pigtown. As you saw, that beautiful landscape from where we are inside the 1100 Wicomico Building on the 8th floor with beautiful views. Raven Stadium's right there.
Yeah, I'm looking at the purple lights right now.
It is fantastic in here. And what I like about this space, it is full of startups, and they have space for more. It's an incubator for high tech and others. And this building actually has a motto. The motto is, where Baltimore's tomorrow is built today. And that could be a theme for our town hall tonight,
could be,
as we discuss so many things. And we're going to get started right away. Kai's going to introduce the panel.
That's right. Panelists that we have tonight, we want to thank our panelists for being here. We have panelist Andrea Smith. Andrea is a former federal and city prosecutor who is with Silverman and Thompson. Andrea, thank you for being here, and she's been at our town halls before. We also have Baltimore mayoral candidate Mary Miller. Ms. Miller, thank you for being here. She's also been on Fox 45. We have candidate TJ Smith. Mr. Smith, thank you for being here today as well. Mr. Smith is a mayoral candidate, and Tharu Vignaraja, a mayoral candidate, is scheduled to be here. He should be here shortly, and when he gets here, we'll just simply bring him up to the podium or to the platform so he can sit down and get mic'd up and whatnot, but he will be here as well.
All right, we're going to start with the news that everybody seems to be talking about today. A crime bill was introduced today by Republican senator that essentially wants to declare a state of emergency in the city of Baltimore to bring state police to our streets along with more state prosecutors to help fight crime. We're going to listen to the sponsor of that bill, Senator J.B. Jennings.
The goal of this is to limit crime. So eventually we're not going to need that many prosecutors. So this is an emergency. It gets enacted. He calls for it. And then once we get the crime levels down, we can pull these resources back out because we're not going to need them. That is the goal of this, is enough's enough. Let's stop the crime.
All right, that's J.B. Jennings. And before we go any further, we should probably let our candidates at least give some response to this, Mary. TJ Smith, this right now seems like a quiet battle in Annapolis between Democrats and Republicans. They're not really saying that outwardly, but the governor thanked lawmakers for essentially taking some kind of action or some kind of step forward. Will this work? And if it won't work, why not?
I'm tired. I'm tired of being back and forth. The people I'm talking to, the people who suffer in the communities, they don't care about this partisan politics crap down in that. They want action, and they want action right now. We can have partnerships with the state police. We can have additional state prosecutors, and we can have all of those resources without any additional legislation. Part of the bill that I read earlier today also was a kicker of sorts of having the National Guard come in and having a state of emergency declared at a certain point when violence is at a certain point. I disagree with that. I don't think that's the way to go, but we can do it with the partnerships that already exist. We need leadership to do it. Right now, we don't have leadership doing it. We have leadership everywhere but doing it. That's why the leadership isn't even here tonight.
So before we get to Ms. Miller, I need to ask you then, would you have state police on city streets?
Absolutely. Why not? We need to have any officers who are able to carry out the duties of law enforcement in Baltimore with specific tasks assigned to them. We need Baltimore police in our communities. We need state police handling the other assets of our communities, like our tourist areas and our highways, like 83. They can handle 83 today, and that's something that we can work with the governor to get done tomorrow.
Quickly, just for clarification, Andrea Smith, just for clarification, you simply can't bring in the National Guard unilaterally and start patrolling the streets unless you have a state of emergency. Is that correct? There's a legal issue here, right?
There's clearly a legal issue here, and I think there's more harm done with something like that, because I think a lot of people already feel as if our police are becoming too militarized. I don't think it answers a problem. I think it creates a problem.
Let's let Ms. Miller answer this question. Now, Ms. Miller, what are your thoughts about this?
Sure. So I think I've been public in saying that we do have an emergency in Baltimore in our crime situation, and our elected leadership needs to take a much more forceful response to it. I think this type of bill is only something that is expressing the frustration that everyone feels about not seeing action on reducing crime in Baltimore. I believe we should accept help and resources from the state, but I want to see the city take the lead in calling this the emergency that it is. And I'm not calling for a national emergency. I'm just saying we need to use that word in the city and say, what are the resources we need to bring to bear here, and how are we going to work with every partner that we have to get this done?
And Andrea, don't you think it would be worthwhile to have more prosecutors looking at all the cases that are there? And so state prosecutors, that's what this bill is talking about?
More prosecutors can help. I think more
Sorry, gotcha.
I think perhaps better paid prosecutors will raise the level of experience. People tend to go into the state's attorney's office to get experience and then move on. But you want to get the more experienced people, you've got to pay them more. So the money they're coming up with to add prosecutors should be instead used to draw in more talent. I thought it was interesting, though, the senator was saying, and then when the crime's gone, we don't need them anymore. That's just, I can't even imagine that.
Yeah. Ms. Miller, we're hearing constantly, and he said it again today, Mayor Jack Young said, in reference to what the governor was making a statement about in terms of more state police, he said that there are funds already in play, and he's saying the governor hasn't released those funds. What do you know about this? Do you know if this is accurate? And why aren't these sides talking with one another? Again, as Andrea Smith just pointed out, to kind of bring down the crime in Baltimore.
The only funds I've heard about have to do with some support for technology in the police department. I mean, when I look at the public safety budget in Baltimore, it's almost $1 billion. The police department itself is about $536 million.
That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. There are a lot of lines in there with state support for the city. I think it's time to build a much better relationship with the state, so we're not squabbling over funding issues. We need to be solving the crime issue in Baltimore, and we need to work with our partners much more effectively, whether they're at the state level, whether they're at the federal agency level, or whether they're simply other agencies within the city of Baltimore. We're not putting this together to solve crime problems, and we shouldn't be fighting about funding levels. We should be getting after the problem.
Okay, we want to transition and talk a little bit about trust in elected leaders and transparency. Just 5 days ago, former Baltimore Mayor Catherine Pugh was sentenced to 3 years in prison for tax and fraud charges. She will report to federal prison in April, and we have done an exclusive Fox 45 News Gonzalez mayoral poll that shows people do not trust politicians. If we can take a look at that as well. Here is the results. Given the number of elected officials charged with criminal activities, do you trust them to act in your best interest? 32% say yes, 52% say no, and 16% did not have an answer. When you see that, let's start with TJ. What is your reaction to the majority of people having no trust in elected politicians?
Well, I mean, it's not hard to understand why, as we've seen what we've seen. Unfortunately, everyone's being painted with a broad brush. There's some
elected officials that are doing great work for the city of Baltimore and the state of Maryland. But when we have people who have jeopardized that trust and jeopardized the way that they did it, it looked like you're reading something from a gangster movie with some of the stuff that went on with some of these elected officials and how they carried out their crimes. So it's understandable that in the backdrop of all of the violence that we have, of the school situations that we have, of the lack of housing and the vacants and the homelessness that we have, that we can have elected officials again carrying out criminal acts in our city is embarrassing and it's unfortunate, and that is what disrupts public trust. We've unfortunately talked so much about the Baltimore Police Department that the elected officials that have committed these acts have flown under the radar.
And Ms. Miller?
So our polls show exactly the same thing, that people are just exhausted by corruption and mismanagement in city government. It's not just the corruption, it's the daily drip of news about water billing and failures in housing policy across the city that just leave people with very little faith in our elected leaders. And I think that it is time that we restore trust in city government. One way is to have much stronger ethics rules, and I'm surprised and disappointed that we didn't have these rules in place, and it's only now that our elected officials are turning to stronger ethics rules, and I frankly don't think they're strong enough.
Andrea Smith, relating back to the poll question, what message, if any, having been in the federal prosecutor's office, in your opinion, what message, if any, was Robert Hur sending to those who would take office in Baltimore city government for the future by this sentence, and the judge, of course?
This isn't the first U.S. attorney who's prosecuted politicians in Baltimore. All the way back to the Vice President Spiro Agnew and Marvin Mandel, the governor of Maryland. The U.S. Attorney's Office, where I was a member for many years, we like to believe that no one is above the law, everyone must answer to it, and I hope it restores trust sort of in a backwards way to know that people don't get away with this. But the message is they're still watching, and they're going to keep watching.
By the same token, and Mary and I have heard this, we've talked to Baltimoreans, there's citizens who are saying there's no way in the world an average citizen would have only gotten a 3-year sentence having done the same thing that the mayor got.
These receivers are good for
judge, depending upon the lawyer, depending upon the person who's standing in front of the judge. More than 30 years of standing in front of judges and arguing for a sentence, and very rarely did the judge go higher than I asked. More often than not, they went lower than I asked, and many times we were about the same.
And it was within the sentencing guidelines.
And if it was in the sentencing guidelines, and I think there is still a feeling in by all the judges, whether it's state or federal, that somehow monetary financial crimes aren't nearly as harmful as violent crime. I think in the long run, that's not necessarily so.
There is that perception.
But it doesn't hit you the way violence hits you.
Mm-hmm. And our city has both of these issues to tackle. All right, we're going to turn to some questions from our community members who came out tonight. We want to thank you all for being here. This question comes from, it looks like, Diane Edwards. She said, Baltimore cannot afford to fund basic needs in the city, yet employs over 13,000 people, 2,700 of which are paid over $80,000 a year, well above the average cost of living and average wage in Baltimore. Meanwhile, similarly sized cities with a history of similar issues like Detroit are managing great comebacks with half the employees. How do you plan to maintain such an outsized payroll? Wouldn't that money be better spent on crime prevention and education? TJ, let's start with you. That's a good question.
Yeah, it is an excellent question. Top to bottom audits. We have to shake the trees. We have to trim the fat.
fat that exists in the city, and we know it does. The accountability is zero. We know that from the water bill situation that we're dealing with right now, which is incomprehensible, quite honestly, that it's money just continuing to be found every single day. And if we know that they're not getting the water bills right, we know a lot of other stuff is hiding in between the cushions of the seat down at City Hall. We have to continue to focus on the things that matter, and there are a lot of hard-working people in city government, but there are a lot of brothers and sisters and cousins and friends that are way out of their league working in places that they shouldn't be working in, and that's what we have to address. And that's why outside eyes is necessary in order to go in and shake those trees as necessary.
Ms. Miller?
Oh, I'm good.
Right, yours works.
So, as mayor, I would welcome the chance to take on the Baltimore City budget and go through that line by line to see how are we raising revenue in the city and how are we spending revenue. And the next thing I would do is I would benchmark Baltimore against other large cities to make sure that we've got the right sizing and priorities in our budget. When I was in the Obama administration, I had the chance to work directly in the city of Detroit, which had filed for bankruptcy. And I got a very up-close and personal look at a large American city and how they needed to build their budget back from scratch. So I think there's plenty of room in Baltimore for efficiencies, but there's an even bigger need in Baltimore to determine what are our priorities as a city. How do we want to spend our funds?
And before we ask our next question, Before we ask our next question, we want to have more results from our exclusive Fox 45 Gonzales mayoral poll. Question we asked voters, how corrupt has Baltimore city government leadership been over the last 5 years? 21% say completely, 64% say intolerably, 12% say halfway, and 2% say not at all. So it is a very, very important issue to the electorate out there.
As well it should be. This is
Yes,
taxpayer
indeed.
money,
Yes.
and the people who are tasked with spending it are taking advantage of the people who they're tasked of protecting and providing resources. Again, the backdrop to all of this corruption that we've seen for a long time, certainly longer than 5 years, is death and destruction and joblessness. We've seen it over and over again, and it won't end until we end it. And I think people are fed up. And that's what you're seeing, the frustration in Annapolis. It's not a criticism of people bringing forth ideas. It's the frustration that everyone has that we're running in place and people are still stealing from people in this city. That's the problem.
Part of rooting out corruption. Part of rooting out corruption is total transparency. We also asked, should elected leaders release their tax returns? 91% of people polled said completely. It should all be out there. No was 7%, no answer 2%. Ms. Miller and TJ, you both say you're going to release your tax returns. When are you going to do that?
Uncle Sam says I have until the 15th. First of all,
We're not Uncle Sam.
I don't know when it became this time frame because one mayoral candidate who's been running for the last 3 years decided he wanted to set a time frame. I'm going to release my taxes, and I said I was going to release my taxes. I'm a man of my word. They're going to come out. If my tax returns don't come out, then the people shouldn't vote for me. I said it's going to happen. It's going to happen.
Would you release your 2018 returns?
What's 2018? The year before last. I'm going to release last year. I'm getting my 2019 done to release those as well.
So
I have
your
nothing to
current
hide.
tax
I was a government employee. I didn't make money like some of these other people.
Ms. Miller. Ms. Miller.
So I will absolutely release my tax returns. I went through 2 very rigorous U.S. Senate confirmations for my jobs in the Obama administration and released years of tax returns are a matter of public record for both of those jobs. I fully support the idea that elected officials should release their tax returns. I jumped into this race January 7th. We're pulling that together, and we will release my tax returns this month.
When will you do that?
Yeah, when will you do that? Because
This
it's
month.
so important. This month.
Okay, thank you.
And TJ, I don't mean to harp on
Before
this.
the first votes are cast, which is April 16th, my tax returns will be out there. there. And I'll tell you something else, because you have these other candidates who are making the tax returns sing. The people who are in prison and have gone to prison for tax returns cheated. And you wouldn't even know by just simply looking at them that they cheated unless further investigation took place. So people are really trying to make that more of an issue than what it is because of them trying to score political points.
The question I want to ask, since 91% say that was the biggest response in terms of a majority saying this is important.
That was also the freshest thing that happened. We have a mayor that's going to jail for tax stuff. So that's why. I mean, if you ask that question, you know, that's why.
Can I just add one more thing? That you also need a leader who is completely honest and full of integrity, because you need their tax returns to be accurate and for them to be reporting the income that they've received. It's why I think we need much tighter restrictions on the mayor in terms of not having any outside business dealings while you're in office. The mayor's job is a big job. You're busy. You don't have time for that. And you should be solely focused on the citizens of Baltimore.
Would you go as far to say that that should be done for the city council, president, city council members, and the comptroller, that they should not have outside business contribute to their campaigns?
Outside, when you say outside,
I'm sorry, people doing business with the city give campaign donations.
Yeah. I'm just speaking for the mayor's office. I know there are different salary levels for city council members and other offices. I'm primarily concerned with saying the mayor should not have any outside business dealings. But I'm certainly open to thinking about other officials in elected office.
Well, I mean, when we're talking about doing business with the city, absolutely. Again, we saw a councilman who had to give back $42,000 for doing business behind closed doors with something that was going to be happening in his district. The people of Pigtown need to know if their council person is advocating for something that's especially controversial. They should know that. Now, I'm not saying that it shouldn't happen, but they should just know it from a disclosure transparency. That's what transparency is. And if you're doing it behind closed doors, then you probably know something's wrong, or you probably know the pushback will be great.
So there almost needs to be some kind of law or legislation that notifies the constituents when there is that kind of donation. Because constituents may not necessarily ask or go to a website. There almost needs to be a full transparency that's automatic.
So I wanted to comment, when I was an assistant U.S. attorney and I became a supervisor in the office, from that point forward, I had to file a public financial disclosure report. And I had to put it in every year. I did it for 20-some years. And most of the people of any responsibility in the U.S. Attorney's Office, the U.S. Attorney, judges, everybody has to file it. It's public record. Someone wants to look up what was going on in my life 4 years ago, I'm sure it's still out there somewhere. And all the taxes and all the taxes that I paid, anything that I owned, stocks, if my husband was investing, it's on the form. There's absolutely no reason why we can't do the same thing for a certain level of official in Baltimore City.
Right. It should just be standard.
Yeah. And the ethics rules exist. They have to have teeth. That's the thing. I put forth a chief ethics officer, so things like this can be run by them. It has to have teeth, and it has to be accountable. Right now, it's not accountable.
Mr. Smith, and it seems like it's convenient to talk about right now because it's election season. We're holding these town halls, but quite honestly, is anyone going to really remember it once the next mayor takes office?
Well, if you look at what's happening right now with all the bills that get introduced all of a sudden and people are working their butts off right now, if it was election year every year, we would actually get stuff done.
Yeah.
That's an idea. Maybe we can talk about that at our next town hall. Ms. Miller, go ahead, and then I have a question for you and then for TJ.
I was just going to add that, I think that ethics have to come from the very top of the house. So you need to have a mayor who's going to send that message down through the ranks and say, this is a city that is transparent and ethical, and we live by very high standards. And I think that has not been true in Baltimore. So I think that's what we need to get from our next mayor.
All right, so I have a question here, another question for the candidates. This is about home ownership. This particular person says, homeowners who have lived through all of the disinvestments in Baltimore City, and now the city is selling us out for private investment, under urban renewal. We can point to some of the areas that are really being developed in Baltimore. TJ Smith has pointed out areas that are not being developed. I want to start with you, though, Ms. Miller. First, you talked earlier in the beginning about disconnects in Baltimore, things that aren't happening, particularly with city government. What would you say to homeowners in Baltimore? And we did our questions to the audience just a few minutes ago about people who feel like the city's not investing in their neighborhoods, whether it's West Baltimore, South Baltimore, Cherry Hill, or whether it's certain areas of Northeast Baltimore or Southeast Baltimore. What would you say, and how would you remedy that?
I think Baltimore has a shameful history of redlining, and it has created areas of the city with significant disinvestment. I think we need to go to a concept of greenlining, and we need to drive investment into areas of the city that have not benefited from many of the city's programs, and we need to create more income in those communities to give people the income to be able to rent a home or buy a home. And if we can raise income in the city, we can materially improve the value of housing in the city and the opportunity for housing in the city. So I talk about greenlining, which is overcompensating for the sins of the past by driving investment into areas that have simply not gotten that attention.
TJ Smith, I want you to follow up on that with the thought in mind that there are still complaints about the fact that this light rail extension didn't happen in Baltimore.
The red line.
The red line. Yeah.
Well, the red line and the red line.
Red line. Two different red lining.
So yes.
Yes.
But beyond the red line, if we, and I'll talk about a little bit of this in my presentation later on, it's the same communities that have been disinvested in and uninvested in for year after year after year. We see where the cranes are. You can probably look around this building and you can look in the direction of where the cranes are. You won't see them west. You won't see them in West Baltimore. And as we overlay where the violence is, the pockets of poverty that have been left to struggle and left to pick up the pieces are where the problems are. When we talk about equity, I don't like to use that word because if we invest equally across the city, everybody's moving at the same rate. That means the people who are at the bottom stay at the bottom. We have to overinvest in the areas who have been historically underinvested in, and we have to be very deliberate about that, and it takes an outside mayor to do something that bold.
And it's been my experience that people given better opportunities make better choices. It just goes hand in glove. So definitely you need economic development in these areas.
We always hear candidates say, we're going to bring jobs to Baltimore. I'd like to ask you both, what sectors do you think you can grow on that are here, and what can you bring to Baltimore to get more people to work?
Because I talked to teachers earlier today, it's still fresh in mind. This city is ripe for trade opportunities. Masonry, carpentry, plumbing, electricians. Look at the state of our city. Imagine young people learning the trade of these trades and rebuilding these communities that have been beat down over the years, and generations living in homes that they built, akin to what we used to have with Sparrows Point, and creating that type of legacy for the next generation. But we also have to look at the cybersecurity. That's why I want Dr. Sandalidis to be a partner with me. So it's not just politicians with their big old hard hats on throwing dirt. It's the school CEO who's interfacing with that building CEO, and they're coming up with a plan on how to get kids in the ground floor and work their way to the top floor.
And get them in this building. It's a building of startups.
And get them in the building.
Right. I mean, this is it.
So I'm really excited by the idea of driving a very strong economic development program in Baltimore, and I think it has a number of dimensions. One is we need to do a lot more to keep the employers we have in the city today and give them every incentive to stay and grow. I also think we have a huge opportunity for organic growth. Look at this building that we're in. There are so many startups in Baltimore, and it is a very affordable city to start a company. So I look at the city and see the potential for the next large employers in Baltimore to grow here. But we need a city that's going to be hospitable to growth, to roll out the welcome mat and say, let's make it easy for you to be an employer here. Let's give you all the help you need to hire, to get the technical assistance, to find the financial access so that you can be a large employer here.
Thank you.
Okay. Here's one of our online, thank you, Mary. This is one of our online questions. Mr. Smith, I'm going to start with you on this question. The Housing Authority of Baltimore has made national news, and no one has done any follow-up with any complaints made by employees concerning abuse of authority. This is what this person is alleging, from the Director of Human Resources up to the agency's chief executive. There's much to be investigated. Let's start with the Sick and Safe Leave Act for employees, with more than 500 employees established in February 11th, 2018, that purposely has not been implemented to this day. That's what this person alleges.
Well, again, the gross incompetence that is spread citywide when you have the same people in charge over years. This is what you get. This is why it's going to take time to repair, but if we keep putting the same people in, you're going to keep getting the same results. You need fresh eyes to come in and examine everything. And as we talk about top to bottom audits with finances, it's top to bottom audits with agencies. It's focus groups with agencies to understand the amount of stuff that I hear from all of the different agencies in Baltimore City about how we aren't running as well as we could. That's one thing. It's disappointing, but it's also encouraging, because what they're saying is we can operate more efficiently than we are. We can respond more effectively to the problems that the community is calling us with, but we need the resources and support. That disconnect from top-down management to the bottom level is a big problem, and that's something we can address through top-to-bottom audits that are extending well beyond the financial.
Ms. Miller, would you please respond as well to this issue about concern about the Housing Authority and whether there is corruption in the Housing Authority?
So there are huge human capital issues in Baltimore City government. And again, I would welcome the chance to go into a full-blown budget review of our agencies, bring in our Inspector General, bring in the auditing capabilities to see whether there is in fact misspending or corruption. But I think the bigger issue is you need a strong manager, someone who has run large organizations, complex organizations, because the city is complex, and find the efficiencies that we need to find in the city. I also think it would be valuable to survey city employees and ask them what their experience is working here. We don't do that in Baltimore, and I think you can learn a lot by doing that.
As opposed to making assumptions.
Yes.
And you bring up corruption with Housing Authority. Again, they're great people that work there. But once again, we have to learn from mistakes. We just had a huge sex scandal with the Housing Authority just a few years ago, and that should have triggered massive overhaul so we don't have to have questions like this. Do we learn from our mistakes? I think the answer is pretty clear.
Okay, thank you, TJ. We have also done a polling of our viewers and many of our community members, Save Our City. And one of the questions we asked, do you feel safe in your neighborhood? Just 26% said yes, 74%, so the overwhelming majority, as you see, said no. We're going to transition to some questions that you all have on crime. And as you can see, every time we do a town hall, the crime questions is always the largest amount. So let's start with this question from Lee, I believe. I believe a portion of the solution will be changing hearts and minds of community members to get active engagement. What are your specific plans, programs to make this happen? Ms. Miller, let's start with you.
Sure. I think the perception and the reality of crime in Baltimore is so outsized and so concerning to everyone. That comes through clearly in every setting. I think that part of restoring trust in police and community is going to be getting the consent decree completed. And I think we should all go online and look at the police department's community policing plans, which are open for comment this month, and comment on them. But I think one way to get at this is to build a much stronger relationship between the community and the police department, get more police on the street, active in neighborhoods, engaging with youth in particular, because I think that's the way we can suppress crime before it starts and improve the confidence that communities have.
Thank you. DJ?
I think some of our most sustainable communities are some of the strongest communities that really don't rely on policing to be the reason that they're safe. They do it themselves, but we need to increase that capacity to ensure they have the support that they need overall. When we create the momentum in this city, this is a resilient town. When that momentum is created and people feel safe and feel like something's going on, you're going to see it catch fire. People right now just don't feel like there's any hope. And when we lose hope, and that hopelessness, that's a very difficult thing to overcome. There are communities who just don't feel safe coming forward. I support the state's attorney putting more money into witness intimidation funds. I support the governor putting more money into witness intimidation. That's what we have to focus on as well, so people can feel comfortable.
And we need to fill the vacancies in the police department,
Right.
because these people are stretched so thin. Absolutely, we need to.
We had 31
Yeah.
new officers
Yes,
sworn
that's
in
right.
yesterday, so
Congratulations.
they're getting there slowly.
Andrea Smith, I have a question for you, and Mr. Smith and Ms. Miller, you can answer this question as well, but I'm going to start with you. But it's going to be a tandem question I'm going to add on. This is coming in, again, from someone who wanted to submit in a question. How will you work to bring accountability of the police department back to the city and actually hold the police department accountable? As I asked that question from someone who submitted this in, I want to ask a tandem question. Many of the police department, and Mr. Smith can respond to this because he was a cop, feel they're not supported by the citizens of the city or the leadership. How would you respond to the police department? Some of that includes the FOP, who feels that police are not supported out on the street, the men and women who police our town. Go ahead.
So when I was a prosecutor, I used to teach search and seizure law to the in-service groups and the refresher groups. And before I would begin what I was going to say, I would say to them, look, I'm here to try to teach you 1 foot in the courtroom and 1 foot on the street. Whatever you do on the street, I've got to deal with it in the courtroom. But before you learn anything, be safe. Be safe. And then I'll do the best I can to teach you and to get what you're doing so it'll stand up in a court of law. I think there's a terrible rub between the police and the citizens, and both are wrong and both are right. The police don't get the support they need. You couldn't pay me to be a police officer, and yet a few bad ones ruin it for everybody.
Is there a conflict of interest at times between the police department and the prosecutor's office?
There shouldn't be. Their goal should be exactly the same. Now, that's in a perfect world. Whether or not there have been instances where the police are doing one thing and the prosecutor's doing something else, I think we've all seen that on the news too many times.
Okay, thank you. Oh, Ms. Miller, she didn't answer.
Yeah, you didn't get a chance to answer, Ms. Miller.
So I would weigh in and say that we do have a complete breakdown in trust in Baltimore between police and community. And again, I think there is a blueprint for fixing this if we can work our way through the consent decree. I mentioned in my crime plan that one thing we need to put more resources behind is the Public Integrity Bureau, which is a place where citizens can lodge complaints against the police, and they should be handled quickly and swiftly and to their satisfaction. But I think the second thing I would emphasize is really communication, because I think we can do a better job of telling the public exactly where we're making progress in police practice in the city. And we should also take the occasion to highlight positive interactions with the police and the community. We don't do enough of that, and I think that there are indications that we could do more.
All right.
So from an accountability standpoint, this is why this portion of the consent decree is necessary. The consent decree was negotiated in 2014 under Mayor Stephanie Rollins Blake and Police Commissioner Batts. There have been 5 police commissioners and 3 mayors since the consent decree was put in place. That is precisely the reason for the necessity of the consent decree, the lack of continuity. Every administration can come in with their own set of rules and what their own set of priorities are. Well, the priorities are set in stone and are legally mandated that you shall do these things. Complaints are one of those things. Where they used to be lost in the land of the abyss, now there's a much better tracking mechanism. These things have to take place in order for the police-community relations to increase and enhance. At the same time, we also have to have leadership in this city supporting police, working behind the scenes to condemn the bad behavior when it occurs, but the blanket statements of corruption is not going to facilitate 31 more people getting in the police academy.
Gotcha.
That doesn't work.
Our next question is from Margaret in our audience. I was talking to her and her son earlier. They have a one of the police cameras right in front of their house, and they ask, why do we have these cameras on light poles? Aren't they supposed to stop crime? So let's talk about that. And if that is not the purpose of it, what do we need to better help the police department with crime fighting? What technology do you endorse or you want to bring to Baltimore? Ms. Miller?
Sure. So I think the police department is working with very outdated technology. CompStat was a 1990s system. And I think given the state we're in, given what I consider an emergency, it would be great to ask the private sector to come in and voluntarily help the city quickly upgrade those systems. Because we know that with better data, we provide quicker resolution of crime, but also better evidence for the criminal justice system. So I see how antiquated the work is for police officers using handwritten, report filings that could be so much quicker if they were given the right technology. We need to ask for help with this because this is critical to getting to a better place with results.
And aren't those cameras at least supposed to deter crime?
Well, it depends. They should deter crime, but you're not going to always be right in front of the camera. It feels good that you know that they're there, but they're not always capturing everything. But I'm actually a believer in CompStat, and I think if the data is used appropriately and deployed appropriately along with human intelligence, we can actually fight crime. You know when this is a human thing. You know if someone gets killed, there are going to be angry people looking for retaliation. That's where the collaborations make sense, when you're knocking on the door of the potential suspect and letting them know, I see you, I know who you are. That's when collaborations make sense. So the technology is one thing and it's necessary, and the fact that there's still handwritten reports in 2020 in Baltimore is a crisis in and of itself, where we're not using our resources to the best of our advantage and our resource allocation screwed up as a result. Lotus notes still exist in Baltimore City.
Okay.
That's a problem, and that's a joke.
We want to take another look. Thank you both. We want to take another look at our Fox 45 Gonzalez mayoral poll. Is it time to elect a non-politician to lead the city?
Yes.
Yeah, 47% are agreeing, yes. 44% disagree, and no answer from 9%. Again, how would you all respond to this?
First, we're going to listen to Patrick
I'm sorry, we do
Gonzalez.
have Patrick Gonzalez who's going to speak about this quickly. I'm sorry.
The point is transparency. And then that gets to the point of corruption. And that gets to the point of 64% of Baltimore voters believe that their leaders are intolerably corrupt. And that's why 47% say they want a non-politician.
Well, this is good news for the two of you, right? Although there is 44% who think that that's not necessarily what they want. So how are you getting your messages out there that you're transparent and that you're offering something different? Ms. Miller, we'll start with you.
Sure. I think over 70% of citizens in Baltimore think the city's on the wrong track and that we need something different. And I think that's coming through in the poll that you just showed us. I have lived in this city for 34 years. I have been involved in the community all of that time. And I think that I know enough about this city to know what we need to do. We need a strong manager who's going to get the city run effectively and efficiently. I think we need someone who can take a fresh look at things and rebuild relationships. We need to rebuild our relationships with the state, with our surrounding counties, with our private sector, with our philanthropy. People are so discouraged about this city. I think you need something completely different to come in and say, let's hit the reset button. Let's start over, and let's get this city going in the right direction.
I have to agree with Miss Mary. It is time to think different. I totally agree with that. I endorse that message.
I've heard that before.
It is time, and we have to think common sense. Some of what we're proposing and what we're putting forth is common sense. It's less partisan. It's less political aspirations. It's about the here and right now. We've dealt with career politicians who've worked to further their own interests as opposed to that of the people. We have to reset. I'm a career public public servant. Just because I've never served in office, and I'm glad that I haven't at this point, quite honestly, that doesn't mean I'm not qualified to lead. We need a leader for this city. We need a new head coach for this city. We need a cheerleader for this city. We need the fresh eyes for this city to be able to assemble a team, a diverse team, to be able to assemble people and build bridges and use the relationships that exist in order to make sure we can move our city forward.
Ms. Smith, let's have your observations, and I know you're not running, but let's have your observations of this discussion, please.
Well, you know, I spent years collaborating with all different agencies. When I had cooperators I had to move, I got people at HUD in Section 8 housing. Department of Social Services when I was doing child molestation cases. You know, the individuals in each of these places, there are great ones, and those people get things done. Those are the people that don't say, well, I can't do that. They just find a way to do what the right thing is to do. I found that in all the federal agencies, in the police department, and the collaborators are the individuals. You know, you can't paint an entire agency with a brush, just like you can't paint any group with a brush.
All right. And so let's get another question in here before we start moving on to another area for the presentations. When will police, or when are police going to be able to lock people up? This is one from one of our viewers, without fear of being accused of excessive force or corruption.
Can I just say something about that?
Yes, please.
You know, it's a real love-hate relationship with the police. Being a prosecutor, my heart has always been on the law enforcement side. I love all those people that go out there and put their lives on the line for us. Law enforcement is not pretty. People get very upset when they watch things that happen with law enforcement, but it's not pretty. But you want that police officer out there doing it. And before everyone thinks that I'm some kind of blind idiot, I'm the one that was doing the investigation that exposed the gun trace task force. That was my last case before I retired, and those were the fellas that were basically running a criminal agency under the badge. So we took them down because a bad cop is a bad cop.
Do you want to comment on that at all?
I'll just say that I think we have a real opportunity now to rebuild the culture of policing in Baltimore. We know what the past has been. We know what the Justice Department said about Baltimore. We're in a process of recruiting differently, training differently, and giving police the right tools to engage appropriately with crime in Baltimore. It's a process. You don't rebuild trust overnight. You don't change practice overnight. But I think we should all be optimistic about this and say, this is the opportunity. This is the challenge that we have. And we all need to get behind our police commissioner and give him the support and resources he needs to get this done. Every partner at this. We all own this in Baltimore.
The community wants the same thing we all want, which is a police department that's going to respect its citizens and go after the people who are trying to wreak havoc in the community. And they want that. And the police department wants to go out there and do that, and they want to know that the leadership is going to support them when that time is there. Right now, we're not seeing that supportive culture that needs to exist. So that's number one. But training, education. I believe we're in this land of make-believe right now with consent decree and policing where officers need direction. They need to be told they can go out there. And the public is waiting for them and ready to support them. I've seen it in the comments when people have done things that they shouldn't have done. The people in the community are saying, I'm usually not for the police, but that was stupid what that person
quickly,
did.
we have police officers who said, we're not supported by citizens in the city. There are citizens in the city who've lost their lives waiting to testify against bad people in the city. Is that an accurate statement? that the citizens don't support the police?
I don't think that that's an accurate statement citywide. I think there are people who have issues with the police, of course, we know that. But I don't believe that is accurate citywide. There are people who, one great example, I'm gonna just use this quick example. The day the bull got loose on North Avenue, and bulls don't get loose in Baltimore. I mean, you got a bull running up North Avenue. It's happened several times, actually. When they take it down, they're putting it on a flatbed. You see some banner back and forth between the citizens and the police over a bull. Something that they were able to unite and say, this is unusual, this is crazy, and yes, we're all scared if this thing wakes up. That's what we need to continue to build upon, the things that we're more alike with and not all the differences. But one thing we all believe in is we need a safer city, and we have to do it together.
All right. At this point, Ms. Miller, we're going to have you do your presentation.
Okay.
So what we have done, we started last town hall doing this. We are giving the candidates who come a chance to present their platform and their views. And it's a great opportunity for you to hear from them. So we're going to begin with Ms. Miller tonight when she's ready.
Thank you, FOX45. Thank you, Mary and Kai, and 1100 Wicomico for hosting us tonight. I appreciate the chance to tell you more about my plans and about myself. I've lived in Baltimore City for 34 years. I've been married for 40 years this May, and my husband and I raised our 2 sons here. I'm so grateful for what this city has given my family. But now I want everyone in Baltimore to thrive. I know I'm well qualified to be the city's next mayor. I'm a career expert in cities and infrastructure, and Baltimore in particular. I served in the Obama administration in one of the highest positions at the U.S. Treasury during the Great Recession. My time there inspired me for public service and showed me how government can work and get things done. Since then, I've been working in Baltimore to help women and people of color start small businesses that can revitalize our city. Working in these communities, I see firsthand just how much people are suffering from escalating violence. Crime has touched every corner of Baltimore and particularly devastated our communities of color. But instead of acting with urgency to solve our crime problems, our elected officials have grandstanded and made this a political issue. We need to call this the emergency that it is and tackle it with full force. We need a mayor who will be accountable and can execute the strategies we already know can work here. Someone who will bring all the players together to finally reduce crime. As your mayor, I will give Commissioner Harrison my full support. I'll give him the resources that he needs to target the most violent offenders and provide more support for de-escalation and diversionary programs. I would act quickly to implement the consent decree. Our policing will never be effective until we've restored the community's trust in BPD. Let's support BPD's community policing plans, which are now out for public comment. But I would do one other thing, and I think this is what makes me different from the other candidates and their crime plans. I tell people Baltimore doesn't just have a crime problem, it has an opportunity problem. And I salute Reverend Hathaway, who is not here tonight, for addressing this directly with his Act Now initiative. Baltimore ranks near the bottom of large cities offering a ladder up for people living in poverty. It's not surprising that some residents feel forced to turn to crime and become stuck in generations of poverty and violence. Part of breaking the cycle of poverty and violence includes prioritizing education. Everyone in Baltimore deserves a quality education, but right now, that is just not the case. I often say, if you show me your budget, I will show you your values. And I value education. We need to prioritize education in our budget and invest in the future of our city, our youth. I'm committed to fully funding the Kirwan Commission's recommendations to bring more equity and accountability to Baltimore City schools. These recommendations give us the path towards better preschool education, more support for our teachers, and most importantly, better outcomes for high school graduates. In addition to fully funding Kirwan, I want to prioritize the infrastructure needs in our school facilities. because our public schools should be everyone's first choice. Finally, none of these problems can be solved if the people of Baltimore can't trust our leaders in City Hall. We are all exhausted by the corruption and embarrassment that our past leaders have brought to our city. I'm fully committed to leading a transparent and ethical government, one where there is no mystery about how funds are collected and spent. I've been through 2 rigorous U.S. Senate confirmation hearings. My personal life and finances have been thoroughly scrubbed. I also received the highest security clearance in the Obama administration. I will never embarrass this city. I'm troubled that it took this long to begin enacting ethics rules. I don't believe our new rules on financial disclosure go far enough. As mayor, I will commit to having no outside business dealings, as should every future mayor. I want to send a message from the top that no one should use public office for personal gain. I will work for you and only you. In closing, I've managed large, complex organizations and budgets, built strong teams, and helped cities across the country come back from the Great Recession. My whole life has been dedicated to cities, investments, and making things work, and that's what I want to inspire and motivate in Baltimore. Thank you.
All right. Ms. Miller, thank you. Mr. Smith, would you present your plan as well now? Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Miller.
Hello again, everybody. I'm TJ Smith, and I'm running to be your next mayor. I was born and raised here in Baltimore, and I've had the good fortune of working in 3 major governments in and around this area: Baltimore City, Baltimore County, and Anne Arundel County. I've also had the opportunity to live in all of those areas, to see how things work and see how things don't work. We are obviously in a crisis of our lifetime here, and it's time to think different. It's time to go outside the box and not allow business as usual and not allow this to continue on the way it's been continuing. This is our Southwest District that we're in. This is last year in Southwest District. 3rd most homicides in the city happen right here in Southwest District. Look at the clusters of violence. The clusters of violence continue to happen at a disproportionate rate in 3 areas of the city: Eastern District, Western District, and Southwest District. 1 of every 2 murders is going to happen in one of those 3 areas. That's despicable. We should not tolerate it. But where's the investment? Where are the resources? This is where the resources have to go. As I move forward, you're going to see the overlays of the exact same thing happening when it talks about healthy communities. And of course, if we went as far as talked about schools, we would see the exact same thing. This is this year so far. So far, there have been 6 homicides in the Southwest District through 2 months. That's unfortunate, but you once again see the clusters a block away from one another. That only happens in the communities that we allow it to happen in. The user-friendly communities that our young people are unfortunately witnessing this trauma. And I say young people, it's everyone that's witnessing this trauma over and over again, and it's completely unfair. You should not have to deal with it. You shouldn't have to see it. You shouldn't have to hear it. You look at this heat map. I'm colorblind, but I'm pretty certain that the colors on here aren't quite, maybe it's where I am, but the colors show you the crime indices per 1,000 people. And you can look at where they are. It's no surprise, it's no secret where they are. As we talk about that black butterfly that you hear so much about in the city of Baltimore, it's pretty well defined on this graphic that shows you, as long as that crime is isolated to those communities, we seem to be okay with it. I'm not okay with it, and it goes back to the overinvestment that's necessary in the communities where we have to lift people out of the poverty and the unfortunate situations that we've allowed for far too long. You have to be bold and innovative in order to do so, and that's what I'm willing to do. the household incomes in our city. As Miss Mary Miller mentioned, we have to create, Miss Andrea Smith mentioned, we have to create opportunity. Opportunity is the key to success. Home ownership is the key to longevity when it comes to generational wealth. That's a form of oppression that we aren't encouraging more home ownership in Baltimore, a city with 17,000 plus vacant homes, and we aren't encouraging home ownership by a 63% black population. It's a form of oppression happening right underneath our noses in 2020. We can have our kids rebuilding our city and creating generational wealth, but we're sitting on our hands, we're pointing fingers, we're playing political games, we're looking for our next political opportunities, and we're not looking for the people who help build these communities off of redlining and the segregation that they've had to live with forever and a day. And as you see, the healthy foods that our young people aren't able to get. These young people are going to sleep hungry. They're living off of a mess of food. They're eating junk, and then they're going to school the next day, and we think they're going to sit still for 6 hours while our teachers teach them. It's incomprehensible. We know that math doesn't work. Most of you in here probably don't give your young children sugar at 8 o'clock at night because they're going to be too hyper. But we're okay with our kids having the opportunity to just drink soda, eat Skittles and junk all day and go to school. We have to do something about it. We have to be creative about what we do. And if we can get more urban farming in Baltimore, we can actually provide better opportunity for our young people. Establishing trauma go teams. This video here, unfortunately, is not playing right now, but the video will show you blood being washed off the street of a East Baltimore street where a man was killed. Just today, there was 2 people who were shot right out in front of Stewart Hill Elementary School. Just today. Last week, 2 women were killed. Last week, an elderly man was killed. 73, a senior, was killed. Last week, 3 schools were put on lockdown because of a shootout that happened in front of it. This is happening every day, but we are baffled with the bull crap out of City Hall, and we forget about most of it. Trauma Go teams, that was a quick 5 minutes. Trauma Go teams are part of the plan. I've talked about this a lot. TJSmithforbaltimore.com. You can see more. The government accountability, as we've talked about earlier, we have to get that under control. I'm not going to embarrass you, Baltimore. We've had way too much of it. I'm done with that. We have to have a better day. The last thing you should be worried about is what we're doing in Baltimore in City Hall. I'm TJ Smith, and I would appreciate your vote in April for mayor of Baltimore. Thank you.
Mr. Smith, thank you. Thank you very much. Quickly, just so we know, and we mentioned him at the beginning of our town hall, Tharu Vignarajah was held up at another engagement. So he was scheduled to be here, but he was held up at another engagement.
Okay, before we go, we have a final question. We try to make it somewhat uplifting. Baltimore City has had many slogans throughout the years. We know them. The city that reads, sadly translated by many people into the city that bleeds. The greatest city in America. We like to call it simply Charm City.
Right.
If you are elected mayor, 1 year into your term, how will people describe your Baltimore under your leadership? You can either give me a slogan or just some phrases.
I'll go ahead and start and give you a slogan. Baltimore, a city on the comeback.
I like it. Okay. Ms. Miller?
How about we fixed Baltimore?
I like that too. Thank you all. Andrea, anything to throw in there too?
Nothing to add. I'm not running for mayor.
Yes. Ever, right? Thank you so much. Thank you very much, our panelists, for coming and having this great discussion tonight. Thank you all, concerned citizens, for partaking in this with your excellent questions.
Yeah, thank you, Town Hall. We appreciate it. And thank you to our audience. We appreciate your participation in our town halls. We encourage you to stay engaged through SaveOurCity.com and on our website, FOX baltimore.com. I'm Kai Jackson.
I'm Mary Bubala. Also, thank you, Pigtown, for hosting us. Good night, and thank you for watching.
Good night.
Thank you.